Being a rugged all-American like Vladimir Putin, Tucker Carlson, host of Fox News and the owner of dailycaller.com, is down here in Texas to go wild boar hunting. And while he was in town, he graciously agreed to come in to the InfoWars studios to talk to us today. And so here he is in the flesh. But first, I want to play a clip of the great things he has to say about me.
It's Jones. Hey, he's more popular than you are.
He certainly is.
I set my alarm to wake up to
I'll tell you what, I don't want any Alex Jones people in my house.
Now, Tucker, that was 4 years ago, and I've always, admired a lot of the work you've done, but I really appreciate you coming down to visit.
Hey, oh, are you kidding? I was having breakfast with a friend of mine in the media business about 3 months ago who mentioned your name. I said, Alex Jones? I said, yeah, he's a good guy. You should go meet him. And I thought, I'd love to. So I was going to be in Austin, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, what did you expect when you came in here?
I expected an armed compound, and that's exactly what I found. We're deep. For those who don't know where we are, we're about 150 feet below the surface of the Texas prairie here in a steel-reinforced silo. This was an ICBM missile silo at one point, wasn't it?
It was, but I mean, you noticed, though, that you had to hit Coke or Pepsi, and then that's when the door opened, and then you came down. We're only about 6 floors under the ground, though.
Awesome.
Do you like 50 caliber rifles?
I love one. I don't have one, but I would love a Barrett. I've always wanted. I'm a gun guy for sure.
Next time you're in town, we'll go out and go shooting them.
Honestly, I would love that.
I've taken Dave Mustaine out. I've taken Mike Judge out. A lot of folks shooting the 50s.
Well, for those who aren't here, you just showed me an I-beam, a steel I-beam, a construction beam with holes that big from the 50 cal. It's so impressive.
We do have 50 cals. We're not actually underground, though. We're on ground level.
Yeah, you are, sadly.
Actually, we have paintings of Mao and Lenin hanging on the walls. And he loved them.
I did. They were done up with glitter and stuff. No, I'm really glad to be here. And as to that tape, that was 4 years ago during the Iowa caucuses, and I was in 2.5 years or something like that, and this guy comes up to me with a microphone and starts asking me, was 9/11 an inside job? And I said to him, I'm as skeptical about the U.S. government as anybody, and I'm also very open-minded, willing to believe anything. I just don't think there's any evidence of that. And he just got in my face and wouldn't back off.
I know, he followed you for 7 minutes, so finally you said that. But I mean, I thought it was entertaining, so.
It was pretty funny. Adam Kokesh, who I think is in jail now. But anyway, I enjoyed the exchange.
Well, he finally got out, and he does have a lot of courage for the Second Amendment. But I do have a few 9/11 questions, but that's at the end. Let's come back to those if we can.
Great.
You are a pioneer in mainstream media that went into alternative media and has been very, very successful and covering a lot of libertarian, freedom-based news. I wouldn't call it left or right. Where do you think the media landscape is right now, and are we seeing the death of the state-run dinosaur media?
There's no question about it. I mean, and I should say I'm hardly a visionary. I only got into it because I got fired from dinosaur media. I was at MSNBC. The station turned pretty dramatically left. As you know, I didn't fit in. They canned me. I was unemployed with 4 kids. And I was at dinner with a college roommate of mine, and we were talking about what do we do next with our lives, and let's start something. So we did, and it seemed obvious. Digital is clearly the future. How soon the future will get here is an open question. A lot of people still get their news from broadcast television, from newspapers, but clearly that's changing. I would think 10 years from now, some of the thought leaders that, I don't think there will be an NBC Nightly News 10 years from now. I don't think there will be a Washington Post. That's all pretty obvious.
I think 5 years from now there'll be.
I think you're right. I think you're totally right.
Who is the original alternative media? Somebody like Matt Drudge?
Drudge certainly was. I was there. I knew Drudge right at the beginning in 97, 98 when he first started, and everyone mocked him. And I'll admit, because I'm not a visionary, I kind of mocked him too, though I thought he was ballsy, which I always have admired in anybody. Anyone who's brave, even if I disagree, I admire. And he was willing to give the finger to everybody who had power at the time. I remember going to a speech he gave at the National Press Club in 98, and I was in the press pit, all these reporters covering this, and he basically said, you're all going away, you'll all be unemployed, you're obsolete, and I am the future. And people scoffed, and I kind of scoffed because the herd instinct takes over, but then part of me was thinking, he's probably right. And of course he was right.
All I knew as a radio talk show host back in 1996, when I was first on local radio, is I went to Drudge, and that's where I could see all the interesting stories every day for my radio show, and I could visit 15 other websites and not get half as much interesting stuff. I think he just has a pulse for not what he thinks is interesting, but what the public's going to think is interesting.
Totally right. At the core, look, the people who succeed are talented, by and large. It's one thing, it's pretty easy to make a splash. You can get famous. It doesn't take that much. But to endure, to keep a successful career going, you've got to be talented. And I think Drudge is really talented. He listens to his own internal soundtrack.
Well, and he's also ideologically really is a patriot liberty guy.
He really, oh, totally.
Yeah, so that's the driving force.
And by the way, he was on this whole surveillance question really early. And people dismissed him as paranoid. You know, they're watching you. There are cameras everywhere.
They're going to have clones. They're
exactly
all of it. Yeah.
And of course, it turns out a lot of it's true. You know, like all the people in the 23 years I've been in the media, every week I get a letter usually written in crayon on the outside of the envelope saying, they're watching me. And I'm always like, this guy's mentally ill. Then it turns out they're right.
Well, that was my next point, is that as radical as a lot of the things I cover are, unfortunately, so much of it's now turning out to be true. I think despite all my political warts or whatever, that's why my show gets bigger and bigger exponentially, is because people are really losing confidence in the system. And I think the fall of Piers Morgan, because he never really had ratings to begin with, but he began to just fall from the beginning, shows a rejection of globalism, a rejection of elitism, and really some of that East Coast snobby anti-liberty garbage. What is your take on Piers Morgan? Because he is truly loathed by left, right, and center.
Well, I agree with that completely. I mean, I always feel sorry. I don't care if Satan got fired. I would feel bad for him having been a married man who got fired. So I never take pleasure in the firing of other people. However, he was almost uniquely annoying in that he's a foreigner, for one thing. For another, he had this kind of supercilious tone like, you're just not as smart as I am, that did make you kind of want to, make people angry. And he didn't understand America. I mean, he just, he thought our attachment to guns was like compensating for, lack of male virility or something. He didn't understand it's baked into the cake that is this country. The right to bear arms is the linchpin of our freedoms. Without that, you really don't have...
The revolution started when they came to take the guns.
Literally. So if you don't understand the Second Amendment, and maybe you're uncomfortable with it, maybe you don't like guns personally. I happen to like guns personally, and I like to hunt. But even if you don't, you recognize if you were born in this country that it's like not this random thing the founders kind of threw in there. It's the Second Amendment. Number 2, right after freedom of speech. There's a reason.
Well, speaking of that, we see talk of ending net neutrality, talk of internet IDs, taxation. We see big dinosaur media promoting it, openly wanting to shut down their competition, drudgereport.com, dailycaller.com, worldnetdaily.com, infowars.com. I don't think they can put the genie back in the bottle, but what do you think overall will be the establishment's response to Congress having lower than a 10% approval rating and all of their credibility draining away? The New York Times saying, as you know, a few months ago, we don't have any credibility. We can't set the agenda. Nobody listens to us anymore.
That's right. Well, I mean, there's a free-for-all, basically, right now. The people, the public look to for guidance and to make sense of the news are discredited. Basically, every institution's discredited. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'm not really sure I want to live in a country where no one has credibility, but that's kind of where we are right now, and that's why you're seeing this kind of chaotic political environment. I would say one thing about the Congress and the president. The Congress has a terrible, 10%. The president is literally less popular than the crackhead mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford.
Yes.
Literally. But they still control the levers of power. So the president still runs the executive branch. Congress still gets to make the laws, raise the revenue. They can still absolutely wreck your life if they want to. So they have no popularity, they have no moral authority, but they retain massive amounts of power. It's a weird, weird situation.
And it's happened a lot throughout history. Seeing Obama, undoubtedly, constitutional scholars left, right agree. If you disagree, tell me why. Power grab on the power plants, on the military, saying NATO's over our military, on Obamacare, on borders, on immigration. Truly, I'm not saying he is a dictator. I'm saying he's turning the office of the presidency into a unitary executive dictator 2.0.
Well, that's always the hope of every president. I mean, look, executives want more power. The guy in charge doesn't want to have to deal with like inconvenient things like other people's opinions. And that's why we have a 3-part system where you have the judiciary, the courts, you have the legislative branch of the Congress, and then the president has to deal with those 2 branches. What I'm amazed by is how unwilling Congress has been to rein in the president. He's basically said to them, I don't care about you, I'm going to write my own laws. You'd think they would stand up as one and say, whoa, we reserve the right to write the laws. Like, that's what the Constitution says. There's a reason for that. And instead, they're so very passive. The Democrats are passive because it's their party and they will do whatever the president asks. But Republicans have been weirdly passive on that. And I'm not really sure why.
Well, I think it's because you've got a lot of offshore interests that basically have diplomatic immunity, and they don't need a free market. They can just control government and get the corporate welfare and the insider deals and create a monopoly system. I think that's really what the left and right haven't woken up to, is that more and more it's a rigged game.
Well, to some extent, it is. I mean, look, people don't want competition if they can get away with it. If I could pass a law requiring everyone to read the Daily Caller every day, you know, I like to think I wouldn't pass the law, but I'd be sorely tempted. That's why the insurance companies got into Obamacare at the very beginning. In exchange for losing their freedom, they gained a captive market. You know, the requirement to buy health insurance insured them lots of new customers. So it is, to that extent, it is a rigged game.
Let me ask you this question, looking out into the future. What do you see happening as the huge awakening takes place, and even the Financial Times of London says the whole world is going libertarian, getting past the political labels, just saying we want freedom, we want more individual liberty across the board, versus the authoritarian consolidation where it doesn't matter that we're awake to them, they're still in power. How do those two forces collide?
Well, I wish that were true. I mean, I've always been on the libertarian side. I have libertarian instincts. I think libertarians overstate the degree to which people yearn for liberty. Most people yearn instead for security, and they're willing to trade liberty for it. And I wish that weren't true, but it seems like human nature for most people moves in that direction. I think I'm an anomaly. I would rather take care of myself. I would rather have freedom than security. I'm willing to take risks in exchange for the ability to make my own decisions. But most people, it seems like, aren't. I feel like we're moving away from that.
So you don't think there's an awakening happening?
I think there's a great dissatisfaction. I think people are disgusted with their leaders, but I don't see people jumping up and saying, I want to take responsibility for my own life. You know what? I don't want your Medicare, actually. I'm happy to buy my own health insurance. I'm happy.
No, I see the point you're making is that people can claim that there's a rise in libertarianism in polls. People will say, they'll say that they identify like that, but that's not actually what they're doing.
So libertarianism has two parts. The first part is I get to do whatever I want, and the second part is you get to do whatever you want, as long as we don't hurt each other.
Yeah.
People buy into the first one completely. I want to smoke my weed. I want to marry whoever I want. That's fine. They're all about that. They're very libertarian when it comes to them and their choices. They're not libertarian when it comes to other people's choices. So in order to be libertarian, you embrace your freedom, but you also embrace restraint. I could control what you do, but I'm not going to. I choose not to control you. And most people are unwilling to resist the temptation to control other people. And that's just human nature, but it's very distressing, and libertarians have to be honest about that.
So where do you see it going then? The future of the media, government?
Look internationally. I am amazed by the number of countries, and look, the bottom line is I don't know, I'm just a journalist, I'm not any kind of prophet, but internationally I'm very struck by the move from democracy and freedom toward reverting back to authoritarian systems. Look at Venezuela, for example, which was sort of a, emerging kind of free market world. Now we're back to Chavez, and he's gone, but Chavezism. Look at Nicaragua. It was communist. They had a brief experiment with liberal democracy under Violeta Chamorro. Daniel Ortega, the head of the Sandinista Party, is president again. You're seeing this same pattern replayed. Let me ask you one quick question. 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when Bush said, we're going to bring democracy to the world needs democracy. How many people believe that still? How many people would like to see democracy in Saudi Arabia or Jordan? Nobody would. We're actually happy that they have authoritarian governments. We don't want their people to vote and be free, because it would be against our interests.
I guess you do have a point, is that a lot of people say I'm libertarian, and there's an awakening and a dissatisfaction with government, but it's almost like a double-minded paradox, because then people are more accepting of Big Brother, of police state, of authoritarianism than ever.
It's boiling the frog. You throw the frog into boiling water, he jumps out. If you turn it up slowly, he doesn't notice until it's too late. I'm not an apocalyptic guy at all, but I am really bothered by the willingness of most people to accept these restrictions on their freedom in the name of security. I mean, I wish I could. I think I'm just speaking for myself when I say I'm happy to take the risk, in exchange for keeping my shoes on at the airport. I'm really bothered by
Well, history's shown when you give up liberty, you don't get security, you get oppression and tyranny, you become a slave.
You don't get it back. Yeah, and I try not to, I don't want to be like one of these guys or, overstating things, but I am really bothered by it.
Well, we are definitely going into a police state, and like you said, it's a movement worldwide. Speaking of attempts to censor the press, the Pentagon announced 3 months ago, I don't know if you saw this report, Drudge carried our report on it, but it was just their hour-long press conference, where the Undersecretary of Defense sat up there and said, we've lost the hearts and minds of the American people. They don't believe the government and the media anymore. So our answer is we're going to start telling the truth by going out and engaging blogs and alternative media domestically.
We can no longer rely on relationships with a handful of journalists. A new blogger might end up being more influential than traditional outlets in some cases. If we aren't talking to him or her, we are missing a potential opportunity to inform the American people. And we cannot hide our bad news stories. Bad news gets out one way or the other, and we must come to terms with telling the bad stories as well as the good. When bad things happen, the American people should hear it from us, not as a scoop on the Drudge Report.
Well, that sounds really creepy. You're not supposed to have domestic propaganda, but that same year they removed the blocks on that. I know Daily Caller covered that, and then now, on top of all that, we have these moves in your big investigation at dailycaller.com on media matters and these memos where, sure, nobody reads them except for the talking points from MSNBC, but still they meet weekly with the White House, and they have things like infiltrate and bring down media. It sounds like Cass Sunstein on steroids. Talk about that investigation and talk about that whole constellation of government's answer to the alternative media is to try to infiltrate it like it's some foreign government.
Exactly, and to try to control it. I mean, I think it's scary because in the end what separates you from the federal government is they have a monopoly on the use of force. They can force you to do things. You can't force the federal government to do anything. You're a citizen. They can force you to do anything they want. And so it's an asymmetrical contest here. They have all the power, which is why you don't want them interfering in the media. When I was a kid, my dad ran something called the Voice of America in Washington, which was our big radio station to the rest of the world, mostly to the Soviet Union. And in their charter, like the first sentence was, you cannot broadcast this to the United States because it's a government news organization, and there's something immoral about imposing it on our own people, because that would be propaganda. And whatever you think of Voice of America, they kept to that. Like, they broadcast outward. This was for everyone else, but not for us. It's the same with NSA. I remember when I was a kid in Washington, people would always say the NSA is, watching everything, but they're not watching us because they can't. It's against their charter. The second that changed, there were major consequences.
And I've talked to people like Wayne Madsen and others who were mid-level there. He said, no, we, until even the mid-90s, did not watch people domestically.
Exactly.
Because the Congress wouldn't let them do that because they knew they'd end up being watched, then they could be blackmailed.
Exactly. I remember when the Patriot Act passed, people saying, this is really scary, and I have to say, I'm always happy to admit my many shortcomings. I remember thinking, it seems a little hysterical. Like, really, is there anything super scary in there? A lot of it was probably necessary, but allowing the NSA and CIA and intelligence agencies that have been traditionally focused by law outward to focus inward, I think that was a very unwise decision.
Oh, it's going to be used politically, just like the IRS being used on the Tea Party and pro-life groups, and then they don't even get in trouble because it's the fox watching the hen house with Eric Holder. If Obama doesn't get in some type of censure or trouble, it sets the precedent. I just can't imagine what it's going to be like 10 years.
Well, what was so striking was when that came out, I think of myself as a completely mainstream person. When that came out, my instinct was outrage. I can't believe that the NSA has the ability to read all of my emails, capture all my Google searches, listen to my phone calls if it chooses, my texts. The first thing, I'll never forget this, was the Republican leadership, not all the Republicans in Congress, but the leadership, Boehner, Cantor, Mike Rogers, head of the Intel Committee, they instantly went to the president's aid, and I remember thinking, well, who represents me?
So it's a big club, as George Carlin would say, and we ain't in it.
No.
And they're destroying the rest of the economy and our future at the expense of the general welfare for their club to stay intact when they're not good managers. I mean, I don't like authoritarianism, but when it's bad authoritarianism, it's really bad. Don't you agree with that?
I'm agreeing with everything you say. It's kind of freaking me out. I don't know. I can't believe I'm like on the set with Alex.
We're going to get to some things you don't agree with in a minute, but let me ask you this.
Yes, I do agree with you very much.
CPAC coming up. This is the big battle. Every libertarian Republican I talk to, which is the vast majority, at least here in Texas, but I travel the country, they're sick of the Republican blue bloods not going after Obama on Fast and Furious and Salandra and Benghazi and everything else, the guns. They know Obama could be destroyed on Obamacare. Why isn't there a repeal? What's going to happen in the Republican Party if they continue to join with the Democrats to try to wall off and demonize the Tea Party when the Tea Party really is the Americana revolution, in my view, that could save this country?
Well, there are a couple things going on. One, I think Republican leadership fears, and they may be right, that the average person, even the average Republican voter, likes parts of Obamacare, likes the, no pre-existing conditions rule, which I think is insane, personally, but I'm in a small minority of them. Most people do like it, so they're afraid that if they repeal it, they'll take the blame. Two, I think the Tea Party, they understand the Tea Party put them there. There would be no Republican leadership if it weren't for the Tea Party in 2010. But the problem with the Tea Party is there's no leadership of the Tea Party. So it's a bunch of different groups, some of which are legitimate, others are just fundraising operations to enrich the people running them. It's the same old story. And without that cohesion, without that leadership, without a clear template for what they believe, a statement of belief, they're not as effective.
I think it's the fact that it's not controlled, but its basic ideas are Bill of Rights, Constitution.
Right.
That's what scares the establishment, because it's like the establishment is a bacterial infection and the Tea Party is the antibiotic. It's not perfect,
right,
and it's got side effects, but it's going to have an effect.
Well, it's had a huge effect in that. I mean, the one thing the Tea Party's been really good, effective at politically is beating people in primaries. Like, they can do that. We were driving through Austin yesterday, and I saw this two guys with a Gadsden flag and a Defeat John Cornyn sign. If you're Cornyn, that really worries you. I mean, they're good at that. They beat Lugar. I mean, they've knocked off a bunch of established Republicans, and so they do have the attention of Republican leadership. But the problem is, anybody can jump up and say, I'm part of the Tea Party, and it's hard to know exactly.
Sure, but I mean, look at Ted Cruz, look at Rand Paul. I mean, they would have passed their gun control probably without them fighting for us. 100%.
Oh, they were. Oh,
so the Tea Party saved us.
Oh, I could not agree more on that. The gun control thing, by the way, all of whom have armed bodyguards, wanted to strip your ability to defend yourself and your family while they remain safe, again, with their taxpayer-funded armed bodyguards. They would have sold us down the river in a second on guns, for sure, if it weren't for the Tea Party. So, amen. I'm totally.
So, again, I'm not romanticizing the Tea Party, and I know it's a diverse group, but the establishment's attacking it. Every time they leak some Joe Biden speech, he's worried about it. The Republicans are worried about it. They tell the Tea Party, play nice, don't run against us, while they're raising money with the trade federations and groups to go after.
I agree.
And so the Tea Party needs to attack and needs to take over the Republican Party, and then people will see it as a real Americana populist type movement. And MSNBC's failed trying to say they're all racist. I mean, I just don't see it working anymore.
Racist? I never understood that part. I mean, you maybe don't agree with the Tea Party, but racist? Where did that even come from? It was like a non sequitur.
You're listening to
racist?
Tucker Carlson talking to Alex Jones. This is a taped interview.
Let's get into some stuff we may disagree about.
All right.
Here at the end. Look, the mainstream media distorted what I had to say about 9/11. All I said was the hijackers were trained at bases in Saudi Arabia. They were allowed in, even though they were on the terrorist list. There was a clear, from my research, NORAD stand down.
There was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
Building 7, which I'm going to show you a video of here in a moment, fell in its own footprint. They said they're bringing down Building 7. I have cops saying it, so it doesn't hurt other buildings. Why not just be honest about it? I'm not saying George Bush and Cheney had plungers, in there. I'm saying elements in different groups, clearly, just like they're using Al-Qaeda against Syria right now, just like it came out about the Olympics. I'm sure you've seen that Oscar-winning documentary narrated by Michael Douglas, where they later admit at the end of the movie that, but basically the Germans were working with the terrorists and basically let them attack as a pretext to get more funding at the Olympics back in the 70s. All I'm saying is, if Gulf of Tonkin was staged, if Cy Hirsch says that the bin Laden raid's 100% fake and there's huge evidence, and I've talked to Navy SEALs families who said that their sons said it was not real, they were going to kill some body double of bin Laden. I mean, when a government's been caught lying this much, I'm not saying I know all the answers, and I know it's abhorrent and sounds horrible. I don't want to believe it either, but all I'm saying is we need to investigate all of these events and not just buy what government says at face value?
Well, I guess the last sentence, clause, don't buy what government says at face value, of course. I mean, absolutely, and I think we have a right to know much more than we do know about everything that government does. By the way, I'd also say I'm deeply skeptical of what large organizations do, not just government. I think bureaucracy creates corruption and deception by its nature, and I'm very skeptical of the claims made by any big organization, I just don't think that, A, you're taking into account the profound incompetence of bureaucracies. Like a lot of things we think are part of a conspiracy are just like dumb moves that are made accidentally. And B, I think that if there was a mass conspiracy to kill Americans on the part of the U.S. government, that would require so many people's involvement that at least one of them would have come forward, and nobody has. So I just don't see, I see a lot of questions. I don't see any evidence of a U.S. conspiracy.
Sibel Edmonds was an FBI translator, and she was working up until 9/11. She said she heard elements of the CIA communicating with Al-Qaeda up until 9/11.
I'm not the only one who knows about this. Too many people know about this. The fraudulent 9/11 commissioners, every single one of them knows about my case and the details and the names and all the specifics. Several people within the United States Congress do know. Everybody in the FBI involved, they know. Everyone in Department of Justice, they know.
Colonel Schaefer, who I know you know, he contributes on Fox some, he said they could have killed bin Laden twice in the month before, were ordered not to. So I'm saying bare minimum, they want Al-Qaeda running around out there because it's a way to take our liberties here at home. Who can deny that they've used 9/11 to take a lot of liberties and now say, oh, our main mission isn't Al-Qaeda, it's the Tea Party, it's gun owners, it's returning veterans?
I don't think there's any question that crises are used by those in power always and everywhere from the beginning of time till present to increase their power, for sure. Either intentionally or unwittingly. I think a lot of these people have, you know, clean intentions, but that's just the nature of power. It concentrates more power to itself, of course. I just don't believe that anybody at high levels of the U.S. government in 2001 allowed 9/11 on purpose. I don't think there's any evidence for that, and I think it scares the shit out of people when you say that, and I think they have a lot of things to be scared about already, and I think that's a waste of time to go down that path. If you're looking for conspiracies, look at immigration, where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are conspiring to bring in low-wage workers to depress American wages.
That's on record.
Exactly. That's a conspiracy. It's a real one, and it's out in the open.
Sure. All I know is that the dean of the Defense Language School, Colonel Butler, went public to AP and said, 3 of these guys were in my classes. The guys that are on the news were in my classes. Something's going on. James Woods on the plane 2 weeks before. They're acting like they're hijacking, and he tells the FBI nothing's done.
I was on a flight. Without going into the details of what made me suspicious of these 4 men, although it would have been blatantly obvious to the most casual observer, I took it upon myself to go to the flight attendant and ask to speak to the pilot of the plane. Since then, I have identified for sure 2 of them as 2 of the terrorists, who actually were not on Flight 11, but one was on Flight 175 and one was on Flight 77. And I've been told unofficially, not by the FBI, but by someone else in actually a higher level of government, believe it or not, just through a coincidence, through a mutual friend, that all 4 of them were terrorists involved.
Something was going on, and I know they had Israeli and Saudi intelligence and British intelligence following them and German intelligence.
Right.
And that all came out. The point is, this was clearly some giant multi-nation spy war game. Who knows exactly what it was? I'm just saying the stonewalling of there's nothing going on here, don't look at it. Take 6 of the 10 9/11 commissioners say that we were lied to and didn't get the official story, but then it's national security. All I'm saying is it should be looked at a lot deeper, because it was the Hart-Rubin Commission, Gary Hart, that said we're going to use this disaster for a new world order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that anytime you have a crisis like that, people use it to their own ends. But I also think that, you know, a lot of this is just inevitable. I know a lot of people who work in national security, and while I disagree with them profoundly on a lot of things, most of them are like decent Americans.
No, I agree, but they're compartmentalized. Let me just show you.
They are compartmentalized.
Let me just show you finally. Have you seen Building 7 collapse, the Solomon Brothers building?
No.
I want to show you that right now.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Moments ago was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details.
Was this after the collapse of the other two?
Yes, she's saying it's fallen, Building 7.
Familiar New York skyline, a symbol by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, much earlier today because of, of course, the dreadful collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But New York very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly.
They announced Building 7 fell 25 minutes before it did, and then lied and said this wasn't real, and then later admitted it. And then we have the up-close footage of CNN. Police saying, get back, they're going to bring it down.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down. Building is about to blow up. Move it back here. All right, guys. We are looking back. It's a building about to blow up.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
Well, pancaking almost like a precision implosion.
It's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
All non-essential personnel move away from that collapse. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. I'm just confused about one thing, and one thing only. Why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place. I'm very confused about that. I know what I heard. I heard explosions. The explanation I got was it was the fuel oil tank. I'm an old boiler guy. If it was a fuel oil tank, it would have been one side of the building.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
I don't want to put you on the spot here and have the black helicopters come after you, Tucker Carlson, but what do you think of that?
You know, I'm not a structural engineer. I think it's upsetting to watch it. I remember when that happened. I mean, look, I have no idea. I don't know anything. I mean, I don't understand how buildings collapse. I don't understand how Building 7 collapsed. I find it really hard to believe that the U.S. government was in league with Al-Qaeda. I just don't believe, if evidence emerges that they were, I'll be the first one picketing the White House.
What do you think of the open funding of Al-Qaeda to blow up churches and things in Syria?
You're talking about arming the Syrian rebels? I think,
yes.
I think it's completely crazy. And by the way, I think that it's tied to Benghazi. Why were there more than a dozen CIA officers and contractors in Benghazi? I mean, I think there's a lot we don't know about that, and I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, but I think we ought to be really wary of people calling themselves freedom fighters. Mm-hmm. We just don't know that much about the rest of the world is the truth. We really don't. We weigh in on these things, and we don't understand the countries whose course we're influencing very well.
Well, I think we agree on one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they've certainly used this, as Rahm Emanuel said, this crisis.
Yes.
They've not let it go to waste.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
They've used all these threats.
Of course.
And no one denies that there aren't radical Muslim extremist terrorists out there. But bottom line, that threat's being used to overthrow our republic and our free system. Why not just say, hey, you want to come after us, we'll strike back at you, not fundamentally overthrow our system.
I totally agree. What happened? I like the Rudy Giuliani September 12th posture, which was, we're Americans. We have huevos. Like, we're not going to be intimidated or afraid. That's who we are. We're not going to cower behind concertina wire. And I wish I could opt out of the system. I'm comfortable with risk. I'd be willing to take more risk in my life if I could have more choices. I would.
Tucker Carlson, thank you so much for this in-depth interview. You've got courage coming over here to the studio, but I think we've had a really good interview, and I appreciate you coming in and coming on the radio show. In closing, what are some of the top stories you think were most important versus the 2 or 3 stories that end up being the biggest thing that the dailycaller.com's ever broken?
You know, I mean, you have the same life where you're just constantly involved in the news cycle. It's hard even to think about last week or next week. We broke a story yesterday about the VA destroying claims of returning veterans trying to get their benefits and destroying claims because they couldn't deal with the backlog, so they just flushed them down the toilet. I think it's a metaphor for the way government, in the end, when it gets too big, treats people, you know, like numbers and mistreats people in the end. But the NSA story, for me, is the biggest story of the year by far. It's the biggest story of the decade.
Because they lied about it and said they weren't doing it.
Reading my email is not going to make America safer. It only curtails my freedom, and it's scary.
Now it's come out, as you know, and we knew this years ago, that the government agencies are taking snapshots off the webcam of all sorts of people for blackmail material.
Well, I don't know anything about blackmail, but I do know that my tech guys, when we first started the Daily Caller, all put gaffer's tape over their cameras, and I remember saying, what are you, some kind of nutcase? Like, you think people were watching you? And they said, actually, people could commandeer your camera. I don't have masking tape on my computer yet. But
come on, you're on the White House enemies list.
I hope so.
No,
I'm trying hard.
What are you talking about? You got Media Matters that's run by them coming after you.
Yeah.
Drudge and me.
Let me just say, final thing, the one piece of good news is, as you pointed out a minute ago, these people may have bad intentions, but they are incompetent. And their incompetence is the one thing that keeps us safe.
Well, I used to always hear this incompetence theory, and I would just throw it completely out back when I had like 6, 7 crew members. Now that I have like 40.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I know how the world works and all these kids. It's like, my God, it's hard to organize stuff even when you know what you're doing. So I hear what you're saying. Tucker Carlson, dailycaller.com. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate that. That was fun.
Right, thanks a lot. All right, folks, that's it for this special edition of InfoWars Nightly News. A big in-depth talk with the man formerly known as Mr. Bowtie. Now he wears, a Patagonia shirt? Or
something like that.
Something like that. All right, we'll see you back here tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Central. And remember, if you're watching this transmission, you are the resistance.